I'm probably one of the only lecturers who will say, if you happen to fall asleep during my class, that's okay with me because you probably need it more than what I'm going to say. But we realize that sleep is a very, very important part of a healthy life. In fact, we actually think it's the center of a healthy life. We used to think diet and exercise and sleep were equals. Now we have enough research to make a pretty bold statement that we think sleep is at the center of everything, because everything else is so much critically affected by that. So what we're going to do today is talk a lot about what happens when you sleep, what happens if you don't get enough sleep. So let's go right into our objectives for today. So the first one is, how much sleep do we really need? There's a lot of debate around this, but we're pretty sure, certainly about what that should be. And what are the consequences if you don't get the amount of sleep that you need, or just as importantly, if you're getting the quantity of sleep that you should be getting, but the quality is lacking, that can be just as bad, or sometimes in certain cases even worse. And we're going to give you some practical tips to improve sleep quality. What we have found is that most people's sleep issues really are self-imposed. We're not doing the right things to get a high quality night of sleep on a regular basis. And there are some simple things that we can discuss that will help with that. And then last but not least, we're going to dispel a lot of the myths that still are out there about what you can do, or how you can learn to get by on less, or make it up, or whatever. There's so many things that we can discuss about that. So for those of you who are sleeping well, or should be sleeping well, here's what a good night's sleep looks like in terms of what we call a histogram. We know we should be getting between 7.5 and 8.5 hours of sleep every night. I know it's hard for a lot of us to get, but when we do that, and when our body does that correctly, this is what it looked like in terms of tracking that sleep. Each one of these colored bars is a stage of sleep, and there are basically 5 stages of sleep that repeat during the night, and they repeat in different patterns. And we call these different patterns cycles of sleep. So there are usually 5 or 6 cycles of sleep that happen during the night. Each one of these stages of sleep and each one of the cycles is very much designed to do something either for your body's physiology or for your brain, whether it's your emotional brain or your cognitive brain. And if you'll notice, there are 3 things about this that I'd like to point out. One, as you can see, sleep is not homogeneous. It changes every hour, and the very first part of the night, the first half of the night, is very different than the second half of the night. We need to get 7.5 to 8 hours for all of this to occur like you see it on this picture, and for sleep to deliver all the benefits that it's designed to do. As soon as you start skimping on the amount of sleep that you get, then these cycles and stages don't work like they're supposed to. And the other thing, you can see the beginning of the night, again, is very different than the second half of the night. At the beginning of the night, we get a lot of what we call deep sleep or slow wave sleep. This is basically where the brain turns itself almost completely off and allows the body to restore itself. So these 2 deep purple bars right here are what we call slow wave or deep sleep. During this time, the body's physiology restores itself. Your immune system, if you worked out during the day, all the benefits of exercise happen during this part of the sleep. Your skin, your hair, all the things that need to be repaired if you're injured, it gets tended to during this time. Sprained ankle, for instance. So it's very important that we preserve the first part of the night for this deep sleep to happen. Once that satisfies itself about halfway through the night, then we see the cycle start to change into dreaming, or the rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. First half of the night, body, physiological, taken care of. Second half of the night mostly is devoted to the brain, anything of and for the brain. So our creativity, our memory, short-term and long-term memory, our problem-solving abilities, our ability to cope with stress and pressure, our sense of humor, all of those things are taken care of during REM sleep. So early in the night body, late in the night brain. Again, you need all this time for this to happen elaborately. The other thing that's important to note is that you must make lifestyle choices that allow this to happen. all sleep isn't created equal. I'm sure you remember times when you've slept 7 or 8 hours and you woke up feeling worse than you went to bed because the sleep wasn't restorative or it wasn't recuperative. So what could happen is you go to sleep and you go through the timing of sleep and you're medically, physically asleep, but none of the stages or the cycles did exactly what they were supposed to do, so you wake up unrefreshed. And we'll talk about how that can happen and what are those things that you can do. I'll tell you one thing right away. If you've had much caffeine after noon today, your deep sleep's already going to be affected negatively. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. And the other thing is if you've had more than a moderate amount of alcohol, that will disrupt the second half of the night, REM sleep. So again, just 2 quick lifestyle changes and choices that you can make that affect the quality of your sleep. So quantity, quality, and then the third thing is we'll talk about as well is the timing. Your body loves to go to bed and get up at the same time 7 days a week. The more you deviate from that sleep schedule, the more you throw your body out of sync, and a lot of your body functions become inefficient and you feel it, and it will affect your long-term health. So in summary, sleep is the center of healthy living. First of all, we don't get enough. Quantity is very, very important. Unfortunately, from our research, 30% of the US population sleeps 6 hours or less on a regular basis. That's not sustainable. And the average in the US is under 7 hours. And we already know that 7.5 to 8.5 is optimal. Any less than that, you're skimping in some way. The second thing we talked about was quality. The sleep we do manage to get, however, is often marginal. And as I said, most of the sleep issues are self-inflicted. We tend to break the rules and turn out to have something what we call junk sleep. Everyone's pretty familiar with junk food. You get home from work or you get home and you're hungry, you can't find anything to eat, you find a bag of potato chips, 20 minutes later the whole thing is gone. Well, you've satisfied your hunger, but you've done nothing nutritionally for you. In fact, you probably have heard it with that amount of salt and fat. Well, we can see now that you can actually get junk sleep where you're medically asleep for a period of time, but because you broke some of the rules, either caffeine, the temperature was wrong, the sleep could turn into junk sleep where it's not restorative, but it took up time. So quantity and quality. And then the third thing we talked about is we don't tend to keep good sleep routines. So timing is very important. Most of America stays up late and sleeps in on the weekends or their days off. But our bodies thrive on routines, and sleep is the most important routine we can maintain. It anchors everything else. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So low-hanging fruit. Today's society is getting up to 25% sleep than we did just 100 years ago. And my degrees are in math. I like to show a lot of charts. So if you actually look at the amount of sleep over the decades that we've declined, it's pretty amazing. And if you think about 100 years compared to how long modern Homo sapiens been on our planet, 100 years is the blink of an eye compared to how long we've been on here. So we're living in the grand experiment of just saying we're not going to sleep as much as we used to. Let's see what happens. And science is now telling us what is happening. And it's interesting to note it happened, of course, during the dawn of electricity and the Industrial Revolution. And now it's in a crescendo now that we have the internet and 24-hour binge watching on TV and all the things that compete with that nice period of time we should be sleeping. We kind of crowded at both ends, and we aren't sleeping as much as we should. They actually do the math a little bit more interesting. If you look at this is the turn of the century at 1900 versus last year, it's about 2.8 hours per night of sleep less than we used to. 1,022 hours per year less. That's the equivalent of about 110 nights per year lost sleep than we did a little over 100 years ago. To put it in perspective, just take this year's calendar and pick 110 nights and just don't sleep on those nights there. That's the equivalent of what we are doing in the past 100 or so years. And again, science is showing us that it's not really a good idea. And we'll go into that in a little bit. So quantity we're pretty set on now. You should be getting 7.5 to 8 hours. Of course, our children should be getting 9 to 10 hours. I have 2 teenage daughters. That's about where they should be. Not close, but we strive for it. And as we get older, we still need that amount of sleep. That's somewhat of a myth that we need less sleep as we get older. We should maintain that 7.5 to 8 hours throughout our twilight. But quality is just as important. And as I said earlier, on any given night, a third of the population does sleep poorly. But the good news, again, is most of the problems are self-imposed. And they fall into two interesting categories. One is we just don't know about sleep. I mean, we haven't never been taught about it. People tell us all the time, well, I can teach you, or you can learn to get by on 6 hours of sleep. We know that's not true. Sleep is a biological need. You can't say that I'm only going to sleep 6 hours. Every second you're sleep deprived, you're impaired in some way, whether it's physically or cognitively. And then a lot of people say, well, I'll sleep 6 hours, 6 hours a night during the work week, and I'll make it up on the weekend. And we know from, again, research that that's another poor strategy, and I'll show you the reasons why for that. So you can't learn to get by in less, and you really can't make it up. You can make it up to the point that you'll maybe feel better and look a little better, but the health consequences are there. And the other thing is what we call sleep hygiene. And those are just the conditions and habits that promote quality sleep. That's things like when you eat, when you work out, do you work out, what stimulants do you take, those types of things. Then your sleep environment, the temperature, light in the room, sound, air quality, all those types of things can be easily controlled that promote quality sleep. But if you neglect those conditions and habits, again, you could end up with what that term we call junk sleep, where you are medically asleep, but you're not getting the restoration that you really need because something's amiss. So sleep's important. It's very, very powerful. If we just get out of its way, it will do its job. Unfortunately, we throw a lot of things in its way that hamper its ability to do what it really needs to for us. And of course, I have on the bottom there a tablet. And most of America now, unfortunately, uses it right before they go to bed. And even worse, they go to bed with it, and it actually interferes with sleep. We've had a rule in our house for a long time, and I try to make sure people really listen to this, is that about an hour before you go to bed, you really should avoid screens in your house. I know that's very, very difficult in today's digital world. Both of my daughters are in school. Most of their homework is on a computer, and they have to do that at night. They have to look at a screen. But again, there are ways we can mitigate and lessen the impact of that. So I went to the internet images and just picked randomly screens that people use on a regular basis, whether it's a smartphone, a TV set, a tablet, a game, regular laptop, and almost all of them, and you'll notice this when you look at your apps, contain the color blue. And blue is significant because seared into our physiology, when the brain detects the color blue, it shuts off the production of the sleep hormone that's called melatonin. So use of these devices about within an hour going to bed delays the onset of that melatonin and delays the onset of deep sleep, quality sleep. So again, you may turn your laptop off or turn your phone off, put it down, and then fall asleep, but it's probably going to be in the area at junk sleep again because there's not the chemicals there that need to really put you to sleep yet. Melatonin has been suppressed. And this is a problem for a lot of people. So if you look at the visible light spectrum, anything actually in this area where I'm pointing, those are the colors that actually promote wake. And if you look at white light, you can see over here, white light is a third blue. So even white light has a lot of blue in it. And so again, this part of the color spectrum, blue, suppresses the production of the sleep hormone melatonin. Think of the sky. Again, that's why it's seared into our physiology. At night, when it gets to be dusk, we still can see everything, but color disappears, blue disappears, and that's a signal to our brain that sleep is nearing, and so it begins to prepare the body physiologically for sleep, including and mainly starting with the production of melatonin into the bloodstream. Now, light exposure shifts the sleep cycles, making sleep more fragile. So again, you fall asleep early on in the night because, again, you've suppressed that production of melatonin. And then Conversely, as soon as you get up in the morning, you want to expose yourself to as much bright blue light as you possibly can. And this strengthens our sleep routine because it totally shuts off melatonin. And if you will, it starts the clock of starting the day. And it actually makes it easier to fall asleep at night when you maintain and expose yourself to bright light in the morning, especially blue light. It's very difficult in climates like where I live. I live in Minneapolis, where you get up in the winter and it doesn't, you're driving to work in the dark and you come home in the dark. So you have to really plan your day around getting into some kind of bright lights, especially the bluer the light, the better. And you can use that by strategically using the right light bulbs in your house. So here's the same lamp with 3 different light bulbs in it. The one on the left over here is a warm, kind of a soft white, that kind of dingy yellow. That's really, really good for sleep. If you look all the way over to the right, this is like a daylight light, and probably it's the most popular light that people use in every room, in every condition, but it actually suppresses melatonin. In fact, most people use these curly Q lights now, these compact fluorescent lights that have a lot of blue and white light in them. So in our bedroom, for instance, all of the girls and myself, all of our bedrooms have these yellower light bulbs in it that allow us to read comfortably, but don't suppress melatonin anywhere near as much as these do. So think of the color of light that you want to end the day in as what we used to do, either by a campfire or you can see what the sunset looks like. Those are colors that are totally neutral to sleep and don't interfere with the sleep process. So it can simply be the choice of a light bulb in your house. There are some lights now that you can put in there. They're LED lights that you can program to whatever color that you want to. And those you can look up and see how you can program them to create sunrise in the morning and sunset at night. So you're always in the right colors, whether you're inside or outside. Very new technology to help get better night's sleep. So light's a big deal. The other thing that we've found all the time is that millions take sleep aid prescriptions to get to sleep. And this is an admission that they're doing something, or something's preventing them from getting a good night's sleep. In fact, 1 of 25 adults have a prescription sleep aid. Now, short term, a lot of times those prescriptions are right, but when it's a regular routine or lifestyle, that's where sleep can be problematic. Because virtually every sleep aid that artificially induces a sleep that's not as restorative as natural sleep. So the good thing is you could try to find out what's the 1 or 2 things that you can do that might be preventing your good sleep right now, and then go ahead and help with that. And then unfortunately, a lot of people use over-the-counter aids as well, like Tylenol PM on a regular basis, Advil PM, any of the PMs. They're basically Benadryl in disguise. They're antihistamines, and they're not a very good aid to take on a regular basis. They have a lot of side effects, including grogginess in the morning. So again, trying to find out what's your sleep issue is the best thing. And again, we'll identify those as we go along. And then caffeine is a big culprit. Next to oil, it's the 2nd largest traded commodity in the world. We have caffeinated gum. Of course, we have coffee and beverages, caffeinated candy. And yes, down here is a caffeinated bar of soap, believe it or not. A lot of people recognize that they can't stay awake during the day, so they need to caffeinate themselves to make it through the day, and then they have trouble falling asleep at night, so they take an aid for that as well. And then energy drinks. 2016 estimate, it's over almost a $14 billion industry. Our population drinks billions of these cans a year. Again, caffeine is a big culprit. And there's a physiological reason for that. So if you look at the top of this slide, it takes up to 7 hours for your body, most bodies, to eliminate just half the caffeine that you consume during the day. So if you have a latte or a pick-me-up coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, half of that caffeine is still in your body at bedtime, and it certainly will disrupt your deep sleep, that early part of the night's sleep. Now, a lot of people say, well, I drink coffee all the time and I still fall asleep. That may be the case, but if I were to bring you into one of our labs and watch you sleep and hook you up, we could tell right away that your sleep is very light, disrupted, and it could be, in fact, caffeine. If you look at this diagram right over here, inside the brain there are receptors that are designed to pick up a chemical called adenosine. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but it's another one of those neurochemicals that puts us to sleep. Melatonin starts it, opens up these receptors here, and adenosine is supposed to bind to parts of your brain to continue the sleep process. Unfortunately, these little caffeine molecules actually have a greater attraction to these areas in the brain than adenosine does itself, so it crowds them out. So if you have any caffeine in your body, you're, again, physiologically hampering the sleep process. Just like light hampers melatonin production, caffeine hampers the effectiveness of this sleep chemical called adenosine. So again, lifestyle choices, just learning a little bit about the physiology of sleep will actually help you do well. Now, a lot of these things you can't just stop cold turkey. If you do drink a lot of caffeine, you need to wean yourself off of it, gradually reduce it, both in quantity and timing. Caffeine's not bad for you. In fact, a cup of coffee or two, caffeine in the day, during the morning's great. It's the timing of caffeine that is at issue here, again, because of its long half-life. And again, you have to read your labels of your medicines. Most pain medications have caffeine to speed the delivery of it. So you may have a headache or a backache and take a Bayer or an Excedrin or something like that. It'll alleviate the pain, but it's the equivalent of drinking maybe a cup of coffee. So just read your label, and if you have any real issues with it, make sure you talk to your doctor always. So caffeine, another one. And then the third one we talked about is the timing. So you want to keep a regular sleep-wake schedule 7 days a week, or you create what we call social jet lag, where you shift your sleep schedule, very similar to as if you traveled a couple time zones away for the weekend and then have to come back. Well, that creates jet lag when you travel. It's social jet lag when you do it without going anywhere in your home. Recent study that was just published of over 447 healthy adults. We looked at their days off and we looked at the days that they worked. And every single one of these people, very similar to our population, shifted their sleep on their days off. It created that social jet lag. 85% stayed up later and slept in. 15% went to bed and woke earlier. But we looked closely at a group that had a shift of 60 minutes or more. So in other words, they stayed up an hour or more later, and they slept in an hour or more the next morning. And they did this for both their days off. And when we did blood work on them, this is where we revealed some very interesting things. We looked at their heart performance and their metabolism, their metabolic effects. And in that group that shifted their sleep on a regular basis by more than an hour, they had significantly higher triglycerides in their blood. They had lower of the HDL, the good cholesterol that protects a healthy heart. They had larger waist circumferences and more what we call adipose fat around their waist. And they had higher fasting insulin levels and insulin resistance, which is a precursor, a pre-diabetic state. So this was controlling for every other one of their health issues, their workload, their all the other things that might affect these types of things. It was just the sleeping in on the weekends and staying up later that caused this, or that at least it was related to this. We don't know exactly the effects of why, but it certainly was statistically significant. So again, we're seeing that not only sleep quality, but sleep habits, the timing, or the sleep lifestyle choices can affect the quantity and the quality of your sleep, and they can show up in a lot of different places in your body. A lot of the things we used to blame on a poor diet or sedentary lifestyle, we can now look at sleep as independently causing a lot of health issues, both short-term and long-term. So keep a regular sleep schedule. And here's the main reason why. Your body has dozens and dozens of what we call circadian rhythms. It's your internal body clock, your digestion, your immune system, your alertness levels. All sorts of systems are tied to these rhythms. Circadian means about a day. So 24-hour cycles, your body has all of these efficiencies built into it. And a lot of them are anchored to sleep. So once you start moving your sleep times, then you disrupt all these other cycles. So here's a very classic circadian rhythm. Everybody knows that our body temperature is average around 98.6, but it fluctuates over a 24-hour period on a very, very regular basis. It's one of those body clock, those circadian rhythms. At night, it plummets. During the day, it rises regularly. We see a little dip in the middle of the afternoon, and then it's the highest about an hour and a half or so before you go to bed, 2 hours before you go to bed. And then it starts to drop again for sleep. Now, you can see that it drops during sleep. It doesn't drop because you're asleep. It's dropping to put you to sleep. And that's a significant difference, and a significant point. So your body's temperature is dropping. In fact, the faster it drops and the more it drops, the better your sleep is. And that's why you want to not do anything very strenuous before you go to bed. If you drink caffeine here right before you go to bed, if you work out right before you go to bed, if you have a big meal right before you go to bed, all of those things tend to raise your temperature when in fact you want them to fall. So that's why you see a lot of those rules. Don't do anything too close to bedtime, because it increases heart rate, it increases body temperature, which is anti-sleep. This little dip in the middle of the day, a lot of people have that, and that is a reason why a lot of people right after lunch they have the yawns and they got to go grab another cup of coffee, because we see a little dip in the circadian rhythm, and it shows up in people who are sleep deprived more. You should be able to zoom right through that, but if you're sleep deprived at all, this little dip in temperature and adrenaline and all that really can show up during the day and disrupt your productivity. So again, circadian rhythms are locked to sleep, so you want to make sure that you pay attention to those. So here's a real quick little chart. We have our body clock, those rhythms that are all going on. Now, what's really interesting is most of our body clocks are a little bit faster than 24 hours, so they need to be reset just about every single day. And what resets that is what we talked about already. That is the exposure to bright light in the morning and the avoiding it at night. And so that's the solar clock that resets the body clock all the time. People who are active and outside, they have really robust body clocks because the solar clock keeps checking them. People who tend to stay inside a lot and don't get a lot of outside activity, they tend to have body clocks that wander. And so you want to use light to your advantage. It's the most powerful way to get your body clock going and staying on the right time. And then the other thing, the third clock that really wreaks havoc on a lot of our lives is our social clock. When is everyone else online? What am I supposed to do? What work do I have to do? And we know, again, from research that the closer all three of these clocks are at the same time, the more efficient, healthy, and happy you are. So you want to try to align all of these so that you're going to bed and getting up at the same time every day and doing all the things that promote that high quality sleep. So let's take a look at temperature real quick. You can see it zipping along here day and night on a regular trajectory. It's very predictable. It's what our body temperature does. And then let's say all of a sudden I'm going to change. Here's my sleep periods right there that were shaking with the Z's in them. I'm going to go ahead on the weekend. I'm going to go ahead and stay up later on Friday and Saturday and sleep in on Sunday, Saturday and Sunday. So you can see I've shifted my sleep, but my circadian rhythms, all of my sleep systems don't know that. They still think I'm going to bed here, not here, and they think I'm waking up here, not here. So during the night when I'm staying up late, out with friends or at a movie or late dinner or something like that, all of my body functions are trying to put me to sleep, yet I'm fighting it by staying awake. So then I finally go to sleep, and I go to sleep at a less optimum time, and I sleep through when my body's trying to now wake me up. So this hour or so plus time that I'm sleeping in, my body's trying to wake me up. So the quality of that sleep is marginal. And then I do it again the next night, and the same thing happens. Well, after 2 nights of this, your body now thinks you're 2 time zones away. So all of these circadian rhythms start to shift over to match up your new sleep schedule, just like you do when you travel. But what happens is on Sunday night, you say, oh no, I got to go to bed at my regular time and get up at my regular time. Well, now you have all of these circadian rhythms going the wrong way, and you're shifting your sleep back the other way. That's why on Mondays in the United States, we see more accidents, we see more heart attacks and strokes, we see more workplace problems as well, all due to the shift of sleep schedules on the weekend. So again, lifestyle choices, timing is very important, can really affect the quality of your sleep. Now let's take a look at the consequences of all this. And one of the most highly researched areas in the last 20 years on sleep is how it's affecting our metabolism and particularly our weight. The obesity rate in the U.S. may hit 42% by 2030. This is a prediction by the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. They had some other very stark information. About half of the U.S. population, half of U.S. adults has one of these conditions, either high cholesterol, high blood pressure, or type 2 diabetes. Those are very, very costly and debilitating issues over time. More so, 1 in 8 of us adults has 2 of these conditions, and 1 in 33 adults has all 3 of these. And the reason I put these up here is because each one of them now has sleep as being indicated as an independent risk factor. So again, it's not poor diet or exercise. If you're not sleeping well, you're putting yourself at risk for cholesterol, blood pressure, and as we saw, diabetes types of issues with insulin and sugar levels in your blood. So again, sleep plays an instrumental role in not just how you look or feel, but also your short and long-term health. And so we've known for a long time there's been a relationship between sleep and the weight problem in the United States. In fact, if you look at the amount of sleep that we get as a population, you can see it's falling over the decades. And then if you look at the rate of obesity in the United States and the overweight problem, it's inversely squared with that. So as a scientist, we look at, well, now, why? Are we sleeping poorly because we're a little bit overweight or a lot overweight? Or are we overweight because we're sleeping poorly? Well, if you look at the statistics again, 60% of our population is overweight and 30% is medically obese, and the average amount of sleep is under 7 hours. So we know there's a relationship there. In the late 90s, 2 new hormones were studied very, very rigorously. One is called leptin, and it's a hormone that your body releases when it's satisfied with the amount of food that you ate. So you have a meal, leptin's released, oh, I'm done eating. On the other hand, when you're hungry right before a meal, your stomach releases a hormone called ghrelin. It says, all right, I'm hungry. So if you look at this chart right here, here's where you're asleep, and here's your hunger hormone, here's your satisfaction hormone. Of course, it spikes during the night, but you don't want to get up and eat, so leptin counteracts that. So you are really hungry physiologically, but you can't feel it because leptin's doing a good job. Then when you wake up, leptin drops a lot, and you break fast, and you have your meal. Then ghrelin drops down really low, and then you can see at lunch and at dinner it spikes, and that prompts you to eat, but then it drops really low, and leptin tells you you're full, you're satisfied with the meal. So these hormones work beautifully, absolutely beautifully, until you start sleeping less than 7 hours a night. Again, ghrelin signals appetite, leptin signals satiety, and sure enough, as soon as you sleep deprive yourself, study after study, dozens of studies now have shown that the fewer hours that you sleep, the hormonal signal for satiety is suppressed. You actually are hungry even though you really shouldn't be, and the fewer hours that you sleep, the higher the signal for hunger is. So you really shouldn't be hungry, but your brain is telling you are simply because you're tired. So what happens is the tired brain is always hungry and never satisfied with the meal, so you end up grazing, and people have snacks before they go to bed because they're hungry, but it's because they're really tired, and over time this can cause a problem. A couple of very eloquent studies show that the average person who is sleep deprived, depending on their gender and their age, overate 200 to 500 kilocalories a day. You do that for a couple weeks, you're going to gain a pound very, very quickly. And the study also showed that people abandoned their healthy eating habits when they were tired. In other words, they didn't grab for the healthy stuff, the fruits and vegetables and all the things that were good for them. They reached for the fatty, sugary, high calorie content foods to quickly satisfy their hunger. And again, just a simple consequence of inadequate sleep now is tied to your weight problem. So I always talk to people about their New Year's resolutions. I'm going to go on a diet, and I'm going to start an exercise program so I can lose weight. Well, if you don't add 7.5 to 8 hours to that same formula, then you're going to be faced with this. You're always going to be tired. You're going to be hungry because of that, and you're never really going to be satisfied with your meal. So you're going to have a hard time maintaining a good diet. Very, very simple science to that. Here are some facts. I do a lot of work with schools in the area. And I have two, again, teenage daughters. I learn more about sleep watching them grow up than just about anything else. 127,000 middle school children every day this school year, and almost 750,000 high school children will fall asleep in class every single day. This was a study done by Mary Carskadden and the National Sleep Foundation. It's a stark reminder that good sleep habits start young, and we need to teach them young. I remember when my parents always, and I've heard it from countless parents and people that I've talked to, said, you know, if you're good tonight, you can stay up late. Or if you get in trouble, you're going to bed early tonight. Well, sleep's essential. It shouldn't be optional like that. It shouldn't be used as a discipline, although a lot of parents do, because that teaches our children that it is optional and it's negotiable. So we need to teach that as much as we do everything else that we do our children as far as health goes. And eventually the need for sleep overtakes all of their needs. That's why about 10,000 times a year someone falls asleep at the wheel of their vehicle and we have a drowsy driving accident. Thousands of lives lost a year simply because of sleep overtaking all other needs, including while driving the vehicle. I hear this all the time. I can get by on 6 hours of sleep. And I liken that medically now to, I can get by being 40 pounds overweight. We know we can predict with pretty good certainty if you are 40 pounds overweight most of your adult life, you are going to be at risk for stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neuromuscular pain. It's just going to happen. That's what science has taught us. And we're seeing the same thing now with people who are only getting 6 hours of sleep or trying to get by in 6 hours of sleep. We can predict with pretty good certainty now some of the same things, because sleep, again, inadequate sleep is an unmet public health need, and it's also a risk factor for a lot of things we used to blame on something else. Great study done out east, 6 hours of sleep for 5 consecutive nights. Think about that, Sunday through Thursday, which is basically the work week, and 30 to 40% of the population sleeps that schedule, 6 hours of sleep for 5 consecutive nights. It creates the same performance deficit on Friday when they go to work as if they had stayed up all night Thursday, pulled an all-nighter. So we know what happens there, where your reaction times and your speed of thought are dulled. That's exactly what happens when you don't sleep adequately. Sleep debt is cumulative, just like monetary debt is, and it builds up. So if that's your sleep schedule, when Friday rolls around, you're pretty much spent. And an eloquent study also showed that this was the same performance deficit as having a blood alcohol content of nearly legally drunk in most states. So the performance deficit of sleep deprivation is very similar to the performance deficit of alcohol. In fact, here's an interesting chart that was done on a study on fatigue, alcohol, and performance impairment. This chart over here is showing sleep deprivation. Here's the number of consecutive hours that you're awake during a day. So most of us should go to bed after 16 hours of wakefulness so we can get 8 hours of sleep to finish out a 24-hour day. And you can see the average person's performance right at about hour 16 and 17 starts to fall below their baseline, their normal, healthy performance levels. And the longer they stay up, the more performance is lost. As you can see, their performance worsens and worsens. So it's right about 17 hours, 16 to 17 hours, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, where our performance starts to drop off. And this is pretty rigorous research. Here on this chart, you can see the same performance baseline, but instead of hours of wakefulness, they put blood alcohol concentration. And sure enough, the equivalent to staying up about 17 or 18 hours is the same thing as about a blood alcohol content of 0.07. The same areas of the brain that are impaired by alcohol are the same areas of the brain that are impaired with sleep deprivation. So when people see these kinds of things, it begins to dawn on them that they should be getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep if they want to perform at their very best in every role in their life. Here's another interesting chart. Again, this is just showing the bottom line, people who are in bed 8 hours versus 6 hours versus 4 hours versus pulling an all-nighter. And this is simply a study that we call the psychovigilant task. Think of an iPad, a dot shows up in the middle of it. As soon as you see that dot, you touch it. So people who are in a bed 8 hours a week, this is over a 2-week study, they rarely make any mistakes. As soon as you restrict yourself to 6 hours in bed, after about a week of that, your impairment on this test shows up in the impaired range. So a week of sleeping 6 hours a night, which we just talked about, now you can see you're in the impaired range. If you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, and I talked to a couple of people this past week in the lab, that was because of what they had to do. After 6 days, they're in the impaired. After 9 days, they're in the severely impaired. So you can see it's a kind of a dose response. The less you sleep, the more you're going to be impaired in terms of reaction time. Then people who we studied stayed up all night. After 1 night, they were impaired. After 2 nights, they're severely impaired. And this is an issue. The good news with this is that we use the term dose response, meaning that, people say, I can't get another hour and a half of sleep. Well, get 15 minutes more tonight, or as soon as you can. And get 15 minutes a night, because every 15 minutes counts. Then after you've worked 15 minutes into your schedule for a week or two, make it another 15 minutes the next 2 weeks until you get to the area that you want to do of 7 to 7.5. Your body won't react that quickly to it, so you want to do it very slowly. I had a boss who said, don't ever try to boil the ocean, boil it a little bit at a time. It's the same thing when it comes to trying to correct your sleep issues, do it a little bit at a time. Here's some more evidence that we see. The week after daylight savings time, when everybody loses just an hour of sleep, but everyone does, there are studies that we've seen that show that we see a 5% increase in heart attacks the week after daylight savings time. And it's the 1 hour loss of sleep that triggers it. They probably already were at risk for heart disease and issues, but it was the lack of sleep or the change in the sleep schedule that actually triggered it. And a couple studies have also confirmed and showed that we see on the Monday after daylight savings time, we see a 17% increase or so in motor vehicle fatalities on U.S. roadways, which is really the fact that everybody is a little bit more tired than they should be. We lose that room for error. So usually on a normal Monday, there's enough people that are awake who can compensate for people who are tired, but when everybody loses the hour, then that margin of error disappears and we see more accidents. This bottom chart right here, we have 4 to 10 hours of sleep. And this is what we call a U-shaped probability curve. And the more you sleep over that 7.5 to 8 hours, and the less than you sleep than that, puts you at greater risk for chronic heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes. Again, we talked about obesity and all-cause mortality. People who sleep the best live the longest. Several studies now have confirmed this. Now, people who are sleeping over 8 hours on a regular basis, 9 and 10, it's usually not by choice. There's usually some other issue going on in their lives, whether it's alcoholism or a depressive order or something like that. But people who are sleeping less, more often than not, it's by choice. They've got so much to do, or they want to do, or they have to do. They got 2 or 3 jobs. But a lot of these are by choice. The point is, again, you want to strive for a healthy amount of sleep on a regular basis. And then again, pick a lifestyle that allows it to happen with a lot of quality. Here's another chart I like to show. This is the average blood pressure on top and average heart rate on the bottom. And you can see during the sleep period, it's the only time that your cardiovascular system gets a really well-deserved and needed break. And it happens during sleep. We call this dipping. The more your heart rate and blood pressure dip at night, the better it is for heart health. It's a better sign for heart health, and it's a better insurer of heart health. So you can see the 24-hour average of this person, and you can see how much it fell during this time. So if the more you shorten your sleep, the less that's going to happen. Again, you want to devote a lot of time to sleep so your heart and cardiovascular, your veins and capillaries get that rest. And you want to pick the lifestyle. So if this person had too much caffeine or wrong temperature in the room, we can see in the lab, or have to have the TV on during the night. We see them constantly changing cycles of sleep when the TV changes to a commercial or a different loudness. We see a disruption, and we see heart rate and blood pressure fluctuate more than it should. So again, another reason why you want to get a lot of good sleep at night, it's to go ahead and allow your heart and veins to get a rest. So here we now have our chart again. We showed this before. Again, early in the night, we get that deep sleep. Caffeine disrupts it. Poor temperature does. Screens before you go to bed can interfere with that. And then late in the night, second half of the night is dominated by our dreaming or REM state sleep. Again, quantity is important, quality is important, and go to bed and get up at the same time every day is important. Don't try to do it all at once. Pick something to, one of the things that we've talked about, and concentrate on that if you think that's an issue with you. Now here's how we know what stage of sleep people are in. One of the things we do in the lab is we hook up monitors to your brain, and we look at the EEG of your brain. So here's what your brain looks like when it's awake. And as you get into the deeper stages of sleep, eventually you get into the deep slow wave sleep. Earlier, as you recall, I said your brain basically turns off while your body takes care of itself. And then during dream state sleep, your brain is almost as active as it is when you're awake. You can see how correlated those are. And that's because your brain is doing everything it needs to take care of itself. And again, we'll talk about those. I'm going to quickly go through the stages of sleep. Not that important, but it's interesting to note. Stage 1 sleep is very light. It's about 5% of the night, if that. When people are awakened during stage 1, they pretty much say, I wasn't asleep yet. They were medically, we could tell. And they'll quickly go through that. If you happen to get up during the night, you might go through stage 1 again. Stage 2 is very important. It's 50% of the night. At first, we thought for a long time this was just a light stage of sleep that was a placeholder for the bigger guys, the bigger stages of sleep. But we now find that there's important things that go on there. And one of the important things that goes on there is a lot to do with memory and memory consolidation, especially when it comes to muscle memory. You've heard that term. So if your kids are learning how to ride a bike, stage 2 sleep is where it kind of gets replayed and their skill gets better. If they're learning to play a musical instrument, or if you're trying to hit the perfect 7-iron, or backhand in tennis, and you practice over and over and over again, it turns out that's where stage 2 sleep is where that gets replayed, and the next day you play, you have that muscle memory, and it's enhanced. So again, sleep is critical for learning not only brain things, but also our psychomotor skills, like driving a car, riding a bike, playing an instrument. That's stage 2, very important. Then that deep sleep, slow wave sleep, is where our body takes care of itself. And during this stage of sleep, very important chemicals get released in the body. Here is a 24-hour chart of a typical body's release of the human growth hormone. And as you can see, during deep sleep, during that slow wave sleep, 80% of the human growth hormone is released. That's why that first 3 or so hours of sleep is so important, because it's critical for your body to be bathed in the human growth hormone so that it can take care of itself. Again, injuries, your immune system. If you worked out, that's where the muscle and bones are getting strengthened. So very important to make sure that you get that good early night sleep. Avoid the screens, get rid of the caffeine, so this can happen beautifully. And as we age, it becomes even more important. So you can see here's from age 10 to age 90, the production of the human growth hormone. And as you can see, between ages of 10 and 20, so our growth spurt years, it drops over 60% and then settles in at past 20, drops pretty good, and then settles into maintenance mode for the body. That's why, again, as I say, sleep's important when you're young, but as soon as you get into your mid-20s and 30s, then sleep becomes even more important because you have less room for error. Again, you start having poor sleep, then you have less to work with. Your body quits producing a lot of the things that are important for it in as much quantity as it did earlier. And that includes a lot of these sleep issues. So that's why it's important to, again, pay close attention to your sleep as we age. You have to pay more attention to the details, the temperature, the light, the sound, your sleep habits. When we're young, you can see our kids, they can sleep through anything, on anything. As we get older, that goes away, and this is one of the reasons we need to pay attention to that. Here is someone who had a sleep issue. At the top, you can see during this deep sleep, during that area right here where their growth hormone should have been voluminous, you see it was suppressed. And the reason it was suppressed, because this particular person had a sleep disorder called sleep apnea. They quit breathing during the night and never had stages and never had the right cycles. And so the production of the hormones that rely on those sleep stages and so forth didn't happen. Here we put a CPAP, one of those masks on them, where we alleviated the obstruction in their neck, their airway, and within a matter of no time, their human growth hormone was restored, their daytime function was better. This particular person started losing weight, didn't have fatigue during the day. Again, it's a sleep issue, but the sleep issue results in health issues that are supported by high quality sleep. In this case, the human growth hormone suppression. So again, great sleep early in the night, great sleep late in the night is up to you. So in conclusion, this slow wave sleep or delta sleep is essential for physical restoration and rejuvenation. So here's REM sleep. REM is the dream state sleep. It takes the rest of the day, rest of the night, and you can see what happens. Here's your brain awake. Here's your brain in that slow wave sleep where the human growth hormone and the body's taking care of itself. And then here's the brain in REM sleep just a little bit later. So you can see the brain awake and during REM sleep look really close. In fact, during REM sleep or dream state sleep, a lot of times it's burning more energy and doing more things than when you're awake. That's how important REM sleep is. So again, if you look at sleep and learning and memory, adequate sleep, especially during stage 2 sleep and REM sleep, is essential for acquiring new skills. We talked about learning cognitive things like the states of the union and mathematical types of things, and then the psychomotor things, playing a musical instrument, riding a bike, driving a car, maximizing new skills, learning new information, connecting new information with current, long-term memory, pruning of unnecessary information and clutter. All of this happens during REM sleep. It's amazing what the brain is doing. And then recently, there's a new reason to get a lot of good sleep right now, and that is actually cleaning the brain physically. For years, we've known how our body gets rid of waste. Every cell's burning energy, creating waste, but we have the lymph system, we have our bloodstream, we have our organs that filter things out, the liver, the spleen, and kidneys, and all that gets taken care of. We didn't have a really good idea how the brain did that until recently, and now it turns out that it happens during sleep, so you need a lot of it. And so when we look at people who have early onset dementia, memory problems first, then dementia, and then eventually Alzheimer's, we see that their brain didn't get cleaned out adequately. We see loads of what we call the beta amyloid protein. It kind of clogs up the brain's system, and it first starts, as we say, in memory problems, and then can cascade into more serious cognitive problems later on. And it turns out that during sleep, their cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the extracellular space that happens only during sleep, flushes by more than 60% than when you're awake, and it gets rid of all those toxins. In fact, there actually now are images of when people are asleep, the cerebrospinal fluid has died, and you can see during sleep how much more volume of it passes through the brain to clean it. So it's another reason to get a lot of good sleep, especially REM sleep. And so a lot of people who say, you know, I can get by on 6 hours of sleep. Well, when you're only sleeping 6 hours of sleep, everything in the sleep system doesn't compress. You basically lose this, the most intense, longest period of REM sleep, because each REM session tends to get longer and longer and more intense. It's where we dream. It's where the brain's taking care of itself. But people who are only getting 6 hours of sleep or less, that's what you lose. You usually lose the most of the type of sleep that you lose is REM sleep. So not a good choice. Again, another reason to get that. So again, if you look at what happens during stage 2 sleep, we see motor skills and alertness getting checked. If you ever take a 20, 25-minute power nap, it's all stage 2 sleep. That's why it's very recommended for pilots and people who are operating machinery to take that power nap in the middle of the day. It really does a good job of alertness and skills. Then during slow wave sleep, we see the human growth hormone come out. There are some memory things going on during then, but most of those happen during REM sleep, where insight, creativity, mood, executive function, all those things are taken care of. Again, as you sleep, as you are awake during the day, sleep pressure builds up in the form of what we call that adenosine. So by the time you're awake for 16 hours, you have a lot of this adenosine in your body, and that's what helps put you to sleep. But again, just another reminder, if you've got a lot of caffeine in your body, even a small amount, it will crowd out those adenosine receptors, and it will interfere with deep sleep or quality sleep. So sleep happens very interestingly. Sleep pressure builds up all day, but you don't feel it because your circadian rhythms are saying, nope, you're not tired yet. I'm not going to let you fall asleep yet. But then once it detects melatonin, then the circadian system gives way to the sleep pressure, and you yawn and you get ready to sleep, if you've allowed it to. Minimum amount of caffeine, no screens and lights going on, the right temperature, no meals, you know, all those things that we've talked about that really do help you get a better night's sleep. So this circadian alertness influence, the things that keeps you awake, peaks between 6 and 8. Remember, that's when I said your body temperature is peaking. That's when a lot of things are peaking, so that you stay awake and alert up until right before bed, and then gradually melatonin will set in, and then it starts the sleep process. And that's weakest between 4 and 6 a.m. That's when you're sleeping great, your body temperature is the lowest. We see a dip in the early afternoons. We talked about that. Again, that's where a lot of people yawn. And again, that window narrows with age, so you need to pay more attention to your sleep habits up until you get old. A couple other quick things, real fun here, that are other casualties of poor sleep. This was a study done at Carnegie Mellon. They had 154 subject volunteers that were quarantined and subjected to the cold virus. People who were sleeping 7 hours or less were 3 times more likely to catch the cold than people who were sleeping closer to 8. And people who were sleeping poorly, they woke up a lot during the night and couldn't get back to sleep, they had low efficiency, they actually were worse off than people who were sleeping solidly for 7 hours or less. These people were 5.5 times more likely to catch the cold versus people who were sleeping at 98% efficiency. And just to do a little bit of math, if you're in bed for 8 hours, and your efficiency is only 92%, that means you were awake about 38 minutes or more of the time. So you couldn't fall asleep right away, you woke up, you couldn't get back to sleep. As opposed to sleeping with 98% efficiency, you're very tired, you fall asleep in 10 minutes, you wake up 8 hours later when the alarm goes off, then that's very efficient sleep. Again, anywhere in between is good. So again, it's dose response. Every 15 minutes of sleep, of quality sleep, affects things like your immune system. Here was another study done at Chicago. People who were sleep deprived and got their flu shot, the vaccination was impaired by half, 50% lower at 10 days after the shot than people who were well rested. And it took up to a month for these people to be fully immunized. So again, if you've gotten your flu shot and still caught the flu, very likely, like a lot of immune responses, if you were tired, your body didn't know how or couldn't respond fast enough to the flu vaccination to build up the antibodies, antigens needed to fight it. So again, another good piece of evidence that shows you should be sleeping all the time well, because it affects everything. Here again, the immune system. So here's where it was when they were sleep deprived, and it took 10 days up to a month to get to where the well-rested people got their flu shot right away. Sleep and pain, we know pain interferes with sleep. Anybody's got an injury or toothache, you know that it's hard to sleep with that. But poor sleep also enhances pain perception. The less well you sleep, the more you feel the same pain the next day. If you're not sleeping well, it also impairs pain by doesn't help you repair the source of pain. So poor sleep at night, low levels of the human growth hormone, not a lot of pain going on. It increases the inflammatory markers that enhance pain. So again, your threshold of pain is lower as you're more sensitive to pain when you're sleep deprived or tired. And it reduces your level of daily activities when you're tired. You just don't do the things that you should to get things moving again. And unfortunately, it increases the use of pain medications. And a great study done out of Canada recently showed that virtually all medications used to treat pain actually alter the sleep architecture. In fact, they reduce the amount of REM sleep that you get, and you actually feel the same pain more the next day. So again, talk to your doctor if you're on a pain treatment plan, and ask about how your sleep interplays with that. And maybe you may change the dose or when you take medicine. But again, talk to your doctor when you do that. And then stress is one of the probably 60% of the people who have insomnia or trouble sleeping cite stress as a main issue. I hear it all the time. I can't turn my brain off. I try to go to sleep and it's racing, or I wake up at 1 in the morning and I think of something and I just can't get it out of my mind. And it's because of stress. So poor sleep leads to stress, anxiety, and worry, which leads to physical tension, which then can absolutely create poor sleep habits and daytime habits. It increases the use, we've seen this in clinic, sleep aids, caffeine, and stimulants overuse, which then goes into poor sleep. So the next thing you know, you have this vicious cycle. So people who are under stress need to work at 2 ways on this. One, de-stress themselves, figure out a way to cope with those stresses, and then also make sure you're doing absolutely everything you can to get the very best sleep you can, and you attack this issue on both ends. In one of our best pieces of advice for people who have stress and they know their mind's going to race at night, it's about an hour or 2 before you go to bed, you physically get a piece of paper out and write down all the things that are worrying you, are stressing you. Don't solve them, just write them down, think about them for a second, and maybe inch it along. All right, I'll call the guy tomorrow. I'll talk to my son's teacher. Oh yeah, I'll do something about that. You know, but you physically have to write it down and at least think about it. Then when you go to bed, as you start thinking about those things, you'll realize it's on a paper. I did something about it. And it's amazing how effective that is. The brain just dismisses those things. Or if you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't start ruminating because it's on my to-do list. It's on my list. And you get really good at this. And you have to do it every day. You can't just say, I'm going to look at the same list. Rewrite it, think about it, move it to the next step. And you can't physically not write it down. You can't just think about it. You got to write it down. It works. So we've talked about a lot. Hopefully you've seen that most sleep problems are self-imposed. And so what you really want to do is change your thought process to sleep. Of all the things that people have control of over their sleep, if you list all of them out, of the things that people have 100% or near 100% control of, they neatly fall into categories. Your sleeping environment. You know, you want to be in the right temperature, cool, dark, quiet, good air quality. You know, people say they got to have the TV on. I've watched that all the time in the lab, and people just don't sleep well with the TV on all day. They might fall asleep, but make sure you set the sleep timer and get it gone. And then the right temperature, 65 degrees is optimal. If you can't get it there, make sure there's a fan going. And quiet. Mask the sound with a noise generator if you can. A fan does that wonderfully. The sleeping environment is very important. Right pillow, comfortable bed. Anything you ingest is going to affect your sleep. It might not be what it is. It might be when it is, as we've talked about with caffeine. But a balanced diet is very important. Make sure you talk to your doctor about any side effects of medicines. And then again, most stimulants are anti-sleep, whether it's alcohol, whether it's caffeine, whether it's tobacco. So moderation is always the key. Get rid of them if you can. And then stay very active. We know that people sleep better when they're active during the day. An active lifestyle and exercise certainly does that. And we talked about stress. It's not the amount of stress that you have, it's how you absolutely cope with it. So again, try to identify, do some inventory on why you don't think you're sleeping well, and then tackle it that way. So that's all I have for you this evening. We went out just about in an hour, so hopefully we got everything that we wanted to. We can always come back again for a part 2 if we have a lot of issues that we wanted to discuss. But I hope you've learned a couple of things, and it dawns on you that sleep is probably the center of everything. And the better you can master the art and science of getting great sleep on a regular basis, it affects everything else that you do. You're healthier, you're happier, and you're certainly in whatever role that you play, whether it's a parent, whether it's an employer, an employee, a good friend, neighbor, your life is clearly affected positively when you get great sleep. So thank you.
All right. Well, Pete, we actually have some questions if you have comments. The first one is, I take a supplement called L-Thionine, and I'm probably really screwing this up, 200 milligrams daily. It's a natural amino acid from green tea leaves. Is it best to take this earlier in the day? Also, I've read that taking it with caffeine increases alertness.
Yeah, I always would discuss those kinds of things with your personal physician. Those kinds of questions are a little difficult to answer without knowing what other medicine someone might be taking, or the lifestyle, or age, and all that. So I would always defer those types of questions to your personal physician who knows your health history and all that better. Now, there are a lot of people who take supplements like melatonin or tryptophan or valerian root, and there are studies around a lot of those that may indicate that you get better sleep. But let's take melatonin. A lot of people take melatonin, and we talked about melatonin. Your body produces a lot of it if you let it, if you allow it to produce it. We know that, as we talked about screens and bright lights. As a matter of fact, usually right before I go to bed, if I'm still reading or using a computer, I'll put on my blue blocker glasses like this, which block all the blue that's coming off of the screens and the lights, allows melatonin to work, and allows me to still use the screen. So it helps with that. These are $10 on the internet. Look up blue blockers. Or a lot of the new computers have the night mode where it takes the blue out. So if you look at a lot of the iOS devices. But if you do those things right, then your body produces enough of the chemicals that you need to go to sleep, like melatonin. Melatonin is great to take when your body isn't producing it. Like if you're a shift worker starting a new shift and your new bedtime says, oh no, I'm 10 hours off of what I normally am, then we've seen that can help with that. And the same with people who are jet lagged, where they're 6 hours off their time zone and their bedtime's wrong, then you can do that. But I would certainly, again, when you take any of these supplements, I would talk to your doctor first.
Okay. Another question is, are naps during the day ideal? Is it actually beneficial? How long should these naps be?
Yeah, I'm a marathoner, and I think naps should be celebrated as a 5-mile run every day. They're really good for you. They're really good for even people who are very well slept, who are sleeping 8 hours of healthy, great sleep. There are a lot of benefits from either a power nap, which is a nap that's about 20 to 25 minutes long. And the reason you want to take that is, again, it temporarily really helps with alertness and attention span and safety. That's why a lot of big companies have nap rooms now, so that their employees can take those power naps. You don't want to take them much more than that, because if you remember that chart of when you went to bed at night, after about 35 or 40 minutes, you get into one of those deep purple, deep sleeps where your brain goes offline. Once that happens, then it takes forever to wake up from that nap if someone tries to wake you up during that. So if you've ever said, hey, wake me up in 45 minutes, I'm going to take a nap, and then it takes you 3 hours to wake up from that 45-minute nap, that's because you got into deep sleep. So a power nap anytime basically during the day is great. If you can afford it, more toward the middle of the day, the second type of nap we call a cycle nap, which is about 90 to 100 minutes long. And again, if you remember that chart of all the sleep cycles, each cycle is about 90 minutes to 100 minutes in the average person. So if you have that much time to devote to a nap, Sleep for about 90, 95 minutes and then set the alarm, or sometimes you won't have to because you'll go all the way through all the stages of sleep and wake up during light sleep naturally again because you went through a complete cycle. Those you really want to do more so toward the middle of the day. If you do it too late in the day, then that might affect your ability to fall asleep at night. Power nap anytime during the day. Cycle nap, try to tend more toward the middle of the day if you really need to get that. But their naps are really good for you. I'm a big fan of naps.
Okay. Next question. My husband twitches in the middle of the night. Some nights it doesn't wake me, but I end up asleep for many hours and still feel tired. But I may also get a normal amount of sleep. How does this kind of thing affect us, even if we don't actually always wake up in the middle of the night?
Yeah, there are disruptions of sleep that we call arousals that really don't actually wake you up, but they bump you up into lighter stages. And we see that, again, with a lot of things that interrupt sleep. And that could be someone snoring, where you hear it, but you don't really wake up, but you're constantly affected by it. And the same thing with twitching. Now, twitching is something that you may want to have looked into. There are sleep disorders that are called limb movement disorders, like restless leg syndrome or periodic limb movement disorder. And if that twitching or that movement is fairly rhythmic, then that could be a sign of that type of sleep disorder. And again, talk to your doctor about that. But that can be disruptive not only to him, but then also to anyone in the bed, because that's affecting the quality of your sleep. So a lot of times sleep isn't, like we talked about earlier, isn't always fully restorative because of something that's interfering with the stages and the cycles. And motion like that absolutely could do that. So you could be asleep for 7 hours, but it's not very restorative because you're constantly being awakened or into lighter stages when you should be cycling nicely into those deep stages. So again, but the fact that you said the twitches, that's a fairly underdiagnosed but kind of common sleep disorder that has to do with periodic limb movement. So you might want to talk to a physician about that.
All right. And then within how many hours of bed should someone stop exercising? I heard you shouldn't exercise before bed.
It's a great question, and it depends on the intensity of the exercise. So if you are going to walk around the block, or if you're going to do some yoga and some stretching and exercises that don't elevate body temperature or heart rate appreciably, or create sweat, you're actually perspiring. Those should be limited to several hours before you go to bed, a minimum of 3 or so your body has time to cool down. Some people would even say more than that. Usually middle of the afternoon is the latest that I would recommend. Like, I'm a marathoner. I don't do any really, really long runs. Most of those are all now done early in the day because I monitor my heart rate and respiration, and if I do them too late in the day, they remained elevated near bed, which is anti-sleep. So it depends on the duration and the intensity of the exercise. All exercise is pro-sleep, but it's when that exercise occurs that could affect it. Now, a lot of people say I exercise right before I go to bed and I fall right asleep. Again, that may be the case, but without peering at the actual quality of that sleep, you could be asleep because you're so tired, but you might not be getting the depth or the quality of sleep that you need. So I would experiment a little bit, but I would err toward 3 hours or longer before with that really intense exercise.
All right. And this is the last one. It says, is it a myth that when your body wakes up naturally, like after normal 8 hours, that you shouldn't try to go back to sleep?
Yeah, the body is kind of fickle that way. A lot of the debate is very similar to the snooze button. A lot of people like to use the snooze button. If you wake up and the alarm goes off, or you wake up naturally and you feel great, then if you go back to bed, I'm going to catch another 15 minutes, you risk the chance of, when that 15-minute rolls around, or half hour or whatever, you may be asleep, but then you may drift into one of those deep stages and you wake up and now you have what we call sleep inertia. You're groggy. You feel 10 times groggier than if you had woken up and you felt great. I got 8 hours. I should go. I would always, if I wake up and I feel great, even if it's a half hour before my alarm goes off and I'm alert and ready to go, I'll go ahead and get up at that point. You don't want to risk falling into a deeper stage of sleep and then you got to deal with that. A lot of people have that problem with the snooze button. A lot of people wake up without an alarm now and when they're in a really good sleep routine.
All right. Actually, there is one more, a really good one. It says, any hints on how to manage jet lag, which is something that military families deal with all of the time because we're constantly moving. Yeah,
there is. Most jet lag is, first of all, unless you're traveling a lot, it's a temporary thing, and you usually can expect about a day per time zone to reacclimate. You can speed that up by doing exactly what we talked about. If it's an overseas type of thing, then again, talk to your physician. But the first day in your new time zone, as soon as you wake up, the brightest light you possibly can. And then at your new bedtime, a little bit before then, a very low dose of melatonin will help, because remember, you just moved a long way and your body isn't producing that yet. Again, it's been proven to be effective, but again, talk to your physician before you do that. Now, if you're traveling constantly and always are jet lagging yourself, then there are actually online jet lag calculators where you say, here's my normal bedtime, here is my normal wake time in my time zone, but I'm going from Minneapolis to Narita, Japan. Well, you plug all this into your jet lag calculator and it will tell you, all right, 3 days before you go, I want you to expose yourself to light here and wear dark glasses here, so that you're starting to use light in your time zone now to ease your way into a new time zone. And then when you get on the plane, it will tell you when to nap, when not to nap. And then when you get to your new destination, it will tell you exactly when to expose to your light, when to wear those dark sunglasses, and if you talk to your physician, when should you take melatonin. You can really compress the time that it takes to recover from jet lag. So the internet's great for that now. Jet lag calculators are pretty good. They're based in really good science, and they give you very easy ways to at least compress that time that you have to get used to a new time zone.
All right. And then Hallie wants to know if you would recommend weighted blankets to help fall asleep.
Yeah, weighted blankets are interesting. A lot of people like that feel. There have been a lot of studies with people along the autism spectrum, actually, where that is a proven strategy. A lot of people like that feel of security in the blankets. Now, some people don't like it. So like a lot of those types of things, try it. You'd be surprised. We just, in one of our new beds, we just designed a new feature called Rapid Sleep Onset. Research has shown that if you climb into bed and your feet are gently warmed as you start to attempt falling asleep, you actually fall asleep a lot faster. So now one of our beds at Sleep Number, it knows that you're going to bed in a half hour, so it automatically turns this on just at the foot of the bed. You climb in, your feet are nice and toasty, and then it turns off. And we know, actually people love the feel, but we also know that it helps you fall asleep faster. Some people don't like it, so it's one of those things you try. I put that weighted blankets are in the same category. I've read a lot about that, helping people feel more secure, and that tactile sensation helps fall asleep.
All right, and a new one just popped up. If someone can't sleep for the first 20 minutes while in bed, is it best to get out of bed, do something like read a book to help get tired again?
Yeah, and if you don't, what happens is it's the classic learned insomnia, where you can't fall asleep, so you just stay there, and then you get frustrated that you can't fall asleep. And if you keep doing that over time, you dread going to sleep because you know it's going to happen, and all of a sudden the bed becomes a bad place, and it actually caves in on the whole problem and becomes part of the problem. So that is great advice. After about 20 minutes, get up, go do something pleasant, non-stimulating, no screens, And if you're going to read and do something, make sure, remember our discussion, make sure it's a dingy yellow light bulb, not anything that has fluorescent light or, bright, bluish light into it, like those curlicue light bulbs. But get into dim light and read something that's non-stimulating. And wait till you get tired and then crawl back into bed. It's really good advice.
All right. I think that is it. Is there any other questions? Nothing is popping up. Well, thank you very much. We are very, very grateful that we got this webinar and got you to come on and talk to us tonight. If there are any more questions, I will. It doesn't look like it. Thought that was one right there, but no, there's no more questions. So, yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your time tonight, and I'll tell everybody that tomorrow you'll be receiving a survey and let us know how we did.
Super.
All right.
Glad to come back too if you need part 2.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Very much. Sleep well, everybody.
You too.